As a community group. The mums and the dads were involved. The young women in the group will go to the market, because remember, we weren't funded. There was no funding to African and Caribbean dance. So if you want to be big and bold and say you have a dance group, then you had to fund it yourself. And my lovely first wife and I used to be hiring, because none of the young people drove. So every time you had a gig, so my wife and I would pack the drums and the suitcases with the costumes, and then we get back home at 1 or 2 in the morning. I would have to go and wake my dear wife to come and help me remove all the drums and everything, because I had to take the van we hired back at 8 in the morning. Only little dancers and drummers, them were sleeping on the journey down. You drop them home, them gone. They don't care about no drums or anything. So my wife made a tremendous contribution in those early days. When I'm waking her at 1 or 2, babes, we got to move the drum. Do we do it tomorrow? No, we can't. The van is going back in the morning. So yeah.
We're going to touch a little bit more on your experience as leading the groups a bit later on, yeah? But before we move on to the next insert, we're going to continue the conversation in between various performances. And we'll particularly come back to the extent to which you maxed out your credit cards on the various foreign trips that you took groups on, and the repercussions of the probation service's attitude to young offenders, and particularly young black offenders. But the challenges you had in getting them to be creative in engaging those young people in some of the work you were doing at Cultural Centre.
Well, I remember Bernard Mauser. That's my old boss in the probation service, and he now lives in Dorset. And before I leave this country, I'm definitely going to see Bernard. The book is dedicated to Bernard, to amongst lots of other people, who, when he became my boss, I said to him, Bernard, I saw Urban Aid offering grants to various projects in Birmingham. And even though we were in the probation service, which is a large government institution, I said, what about if we applied for some funding to start a community project? For the simple reason that in the good old days, and I'm going back to the late 60s, early 70s, we were stigmatized if you had children out of wedlock, if you were in prison or you were on probation. I said, let us create a space, i.e. an office, where people can come, young people, and in my office it's always African images, books, drums, music, cassettes. Let's create a space that was inviting and informative. And there were many young people, I have to say, who were on probation, who weren't very good readers. But because I always had books in my office, and African and Caribbean history, they'll pick them up, and their interest grew. And many of them went on to university. But simply from just having books and saying, I didn't even have to say, they'll pick a book up, oh, this is interesting. Never telling me they couldn't read, but then they'll say to me, I can't read, you know. I said, I'll help you. And the same thing with the drumming. It was, let's do something where we can have fun. So we started, my whole life is based about, let's have some fun.
Okay.
That's how it started.
All right. Let's have some fun, you say. But the book is based on a serious piece of research. And everybody that I've spoken to this evening that's read it says it's deep, man. It's very deep.
I was drunk and I wrote it.
I was going to bring that one up. I mean, my long-lasting memory of Bob is that he used to have this little saying, you know, when I finish this, you know, may have a nice little spot under the mango tree. And you will find me there with my little cup of rum. Did you make it?
Nothing has changed.
Okay.
I'm happy to say I now live in Barbados.
You now live in Barbados.
I have a beautiful wife who is of Jamaican origin, but born in the UK, and I hope she does think we have a beautiful life with a bottle of rum.
Okay. All right. Let's. We're going to come back to the conversation in a short while, but we must take a reading from this most impressive book. The reader, many of us have known for a long time. Let me see if you can guess who it is. She is passionate about drumming and music from Africa and the various diasporas. She, over the last couple of decades, has been very much into research into black literature. And I think as a consequence of that is a most fitting reader, because at least you'll understand the complexities which your languaging in some of the book brings to the reader. May I welcome to the stage for our first reading, Ifemo Omari.
Boy, oh boy, look at you. Kuno. Well dressed, well turned out, on time. So many people going back decades. And guess what? We're not at a funeral. Well done. So my first reading from Dr. Bob Ramdhanie's book. By the mid-15th century, Portugal and Britain were trading peacefully on the west coast of Africa. And as European nations continued their exploration for new land acquisitions, the vast continent of Africa offered several opportunities. However, Africa during this historical period was already well advanced in arts and culture and systems of governance, and its religious and cultural practices were grounded in common cultural and community values. During those periods of peaceful trading, it was common practice by European nations to just take a few Africans on their return journeys to Europe, primarily to highlight their status in society and to engage them as nannies and domestic servants. Many African countries had witnessed modernization through several well-established kingdoms and empires stretching from the Achaemenid Empire 100 to 960 CE to the Ethiopian Empire, the latter lasting until 1975. The continent had communities, thriving communities scattered across its vastness, and traditional values were embedded in everyday life through their religious practices, including dancing. In order, therefore, to understand the people within those developed societies whose languages, dress codes, food preferences, and forms of worship were different to those of Europe, one had to spend time understanding their religious beliefs, systems of governance, and their daily social and cultural practices. Britain and its European colonizing neighbors joined forces to create a powerful voice to elevate their British and European cultural values and whiteness, whilst at the same time distorting and misrepresenting the values of the people of Africa and their blackness. The people and Africa itself were completely otherized as Europe raped and ravaged the continent. The colonizers' failure to show any appreciation or understanding of African and later Caribbean cultural traditions had therefore laid a platform that continued in many subtle ways during these last few decades in the UK itself. Since then, and in relation to African dance, Black communities have been constantly defending and defining their art forms against British values and its historical bias and misinformation. But who were those African people that the British believed to be primitive? And what were their beliefs, values, and cultural traditions that even till today still bind them together? History has shown over several centuries and even up to today that Africa's religious practices, including dance performances, are embedded in the soul and spirit of its inhabitants. Dance is also the earliest art form, as early man dances on every occasion for joy, grief, love, fear, at sunrise, death, birth. For Africans, this was and remains the strong binding cord within universal Black communities, finding expression within religious congregations and christenings, weddings, funerals, and social occasions. African dance. Across the vast continent, the rise and fall of various empires had left legacies highlighting the progress made. At the Windhoek Conference on the African origin of African civilization and the destiny of Africa, Nahas Angula reminded delegates that, and I quote, "It is no exaggeration to state that African civilization reached its highest point between the 12th and 16th centuries. Within these centuries, Africa developed its own culture, economic systems, and political institutions. Art and craft were of high quality. Gestures, rituals, and symbols from social and religious dances of Africa, principally from Nigeria, Benin, South Africa, and Ghana, have resurfaced in the diaspora in Black dance practice. Communities in the Caribbean and in the UK now participate in and observe the traditions of Sango, Nine Nights, Kinkimini, Limbo, Gongon, Kumina, I want to dance, Calypso, Carnival, and Reggae in performance or through community gatherings. Thank you.
Absolutely fantastic. I think they deserve another round of
We socialized. We played Pardna, we played Susu from Trinidad, we had shebeens, we were in little silos, and dance gave people that sense of belonging. steelman music, limbo dancing, calypso, soca, reggae came much later. But dance was a wonderful way of identifying who young people were. Here am I, black and proud, young, gifted and black. It was that kind of message we wanted to share. So that you could marginalize me how much you want. You could send me to rubbish schools. You could give me poor housing. I know who I am. And when I get on that stage, you can, and history shows, which is why the colonizers, whether they were British, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, in Africa, dissed all African culture because they did not understand it, so they couldn't control it. So when you see African dancers on the stage, they're saying, brother, this is who I am. rightly represented the rights of Caribbean. And I told them that. We had a running debate for weeks in the Caribbean newspaper. Because I said, if you say PACN, Pan-African Caribbean Movement, me born and grew up in the Caribbean, and me define myself as black. So me I know who you defining me as, but I'm a Caribbean man. So it's either you say Africans only, and me wouldn't push up my chest. If you say Caribbean people, you can't lock me up. I'm a Caribbean person. But in those days, we were so, racism was rampant. We shouldn't get away from that. And the things that knitted black communities together, and I mean black in the political sense, where there were Chinese, there were Pakistanis, there were Indians, all of us who were suffering. under the cosh of being immigrants or whatever they called us. You know, we had different names as we went along. But the idea was there was a sense of communion that grew out of the community that people rallied around. I remember as a young man being in London, 13 dead and nothing said when the kids were killed at New Cross, and so many other marches. So that one of the magical ways that black communities survived those good old days was, one, we still played Pardna. So we had a group. You wouldn't get a mortgage or you can't buy a washing machine. We all group up, tell away, and you put money, you draw your partner, and you buy it. We went to churches, and when we didn't have churches, as in the church building, we met in people's homes and on the streets. And that's how we survived. And in particular, when you refer to dancers, their gift to the world was this beautiful thing we call African or Caribbean dance. So it wasn't, in a sense, we looked beyond the blackness to see who the people were, and they were proud, wonderful drummers and dancers. My God, there was something called a cultural center, and all this was going on, but we never knew anything. So music, in a sense, was the message. And again, for those of you who know me, not when I finished with dance, but when the work was becoming a lot, and I did invite this lovely young man sitting on my left, because Derek was dancing with us, and then I was traveling up quite a lot. And I was moving from Handsworth to go down to Moseley. And I said to Derek, you should come and take over. You used to dance with us, he left. You should come and take over Kokuma. You remember that? And Derek said to me, boy, them rude, them have no manners, they only listen to you, they don't listen to nobody else. And when you weren't here for that 2 weeks, me couldn't stand them. Derek did come back, he worked with them. And again, in terms of political and, I would say, artistic development, when I was around, we did display dancing. When Derek Anderson came in, they shifted from display dancing to dance productions. We did 9 nights. So in our case, we were just repeating what we learned from our Ghanaian brothers and sisters, and just repeating that, drumming, dance. And you were quite brave, and you did 2 productions. I remember 9 nights. And where you worked with Ni from Ghana. So in terms of making both a political statement, but also in terms of improving our quality, Ekome down in Bristol was set in the pattern. Lansdale down in Wolverhampton was set in the pattern. So we had to lift our standards. So transitionally, Kokuma, the group we were talking about, so we moved from Mystic and the Israelites to Kokuma, and then eventually to DLA, where Kokuma continued. But it was this, we were now seeking grants. The biggest mistake I think we ever made in the United Kingdom. The biggest mistake. Because it was the funders, and I wish there are some here, I don't know. It was the funders who crucified and kept African and black dance in the doldrums. And I say that unashamedly, where their psychological and mental bias was so much against us that when they started giving you the crumbs, it never came from the dance budget. It came from ethnic minority, it came from community grouping, it came from this, because they never saw what we were doing as they never saw that.
of applause for us. The final conversation we'll have before we finish, as it were, in style, Bob. You've begun to let loose on your thoughts about the funding agencies back in the day, and I kind of interrupted you. So I'm giving you license now to do what Bob always does, which is speak his mind, sometimes in appropriate ways, others inappropriate. But you can choose whichever one you want to use this evening, Bob, as it's your evening.
I don't know what to say. I'm retired, I am happy, I am blessed in many ways. I live in an island that is beautiful sunshine and beaches and people. So I don't want to damn this country, because the beautiful thing about England, Trinidad gave me an education. Trinidad gave me values for living. Trinidad gave me family life and culture. But I will never diss England. England gave me educational and economic opportunities. And no matter where you came from in the Caribbean, even if you came as a nurse, a doctor, a construction person, we, after a degree of prejudice and everything that goes with society, we were able to save, to buy our own homes, to send our children to schools and universities. So I will always say, my life has been, and I've lived in the UK for over 50 years. But Trinidad, like I'm sure Jamaica and St. Lucia and St. Kitts and Dominica, gave those of us who came here a grounding and gave us values that we still live by today. Respect and love for each other. The movement into dance in society equally did that for young black people who were searching. Like many young people today are searching, white or black. It breaks my heart when you read the newspaper and see 12 and 13-year-olds committing suicide. And we have to reflect and think what or how society is, or for all the talk about young people and doing, how we are failing. We, all of us around here, are failing our young people in some way. And I say with passion in my soul and in my body, if we could only encourage them to get into the arts, to play music, to write, to paint, to do poetry, that is a wonderful pathway to doing other more magical things in their lives. But it's how we grab them and use the arts as weapons for social improvement in society. For my sins today, I started a music festival in the Amazon in Guyana, somewhere I'd never been before, and I just got to this place, and all there was mountains and beauty, no people, hardly any animals I saw. But there was a kind of peace in that environment that today, I registered a company there in 2013. So today, what's the difference? 13 years later, we now run a music festival in the Amazon. And my focus there, like my focus here, was working with the marginalized, with young black people, with people of all races who were on the fringes of society when I was a probation officer. In the Amazon, I now work with indigenous Makushis, Wapishanas, indigenous cultures, who were the first people on the lands in the Caribbean, and who, by and far, are neglected in contemporary societies today. So my kind of using the arts, so I work with them in music, in dance, in pottery, in fashion, I tell you, simple, beautiful people whose understanding of the world is not about concrete and glass, and whose children I see walking to school 4 miles, morning and evening. And I am talking about 4 and 5-year-olds who are going to their first school or going to churches. And that just taught me this simplicity in life, which I wish we will apply here, advanced as we are. Find the inner soul, and you could create magic. And that inner soul, for me, comes from one who writes about dance and has never danced in his life. So believe you me, it works. Because I'd like to think I've impacted so many people into the arts. And I do want, when the lights go on, to hug them all and bless them all and thank them all. But it's to find that inner space. And I think the most wonderful way to do that is through the arts.
Thank you very much for that one. Not being able to dance. I watched you dance around the probation service. I've watched you dance around the various regional arts associations. I've watched you dance around those people that you needed to get something out of, but didn't necessarily particularly want to stay after you finished dancing, for sake that they might take their money back. So I would contest that you're a professional dancer of a different ilk. Yeah. I think it's time really for our final reading, is it not? If I can welcome Ephemeral again to close up the reading session.
To say that I am inspired is such an understatement. I joked earlier about this gathering feeling like a funeral because there are decades and decades of time amongst us. But I just want to reflect on what Bob and Derek, those two old gentlemen, those two sages have been musing on. And I sum it up that there's a template that's been created and a template that we have, that you have. And it's perseverance, the decades. It's skills, what we do. And it's love. So that's a reason to buy this book. It is the reason to buy this book. I can hear people going, 35! But in terms of the decades and the love that is in here, buy the book. The final thing I need to say is write our books. Continue writing. Believe it or not, if it isn't not written down, it does not exist.
Derek for his perceptive questioning. Last but not least, our wonderful musicians here. Thank you to all those people. Okay, we have a few minutes for a Q&A. So if there's any question you'd like to ask, please don't be shy.
Sorry, may I just ask if we can put the house lights?
Good.
Then may I interrupt and say while
Yes.
we are waiting, and I hope you would like to ask Derek or myself some questions, but I'd like to stand, and I really do want to, so I have to see people to do acknowledge and give thanks for all the beautiful people whose names I hope are on the front page of the book that has traveled with me and made the book possible. So I'm starting this away and moving that away. First of all, and please do stand and enjoy the warmth of the book. The Joseph sisters. And I know my wife is present, but boy, when them was dancing, you couldn't keep your eyes off them yet. I move along. Let me have a look and see who we dance with. Babes. A wonderful Bajan sister of mine. With you in the first group that I ever had, and why them two left-footers done with. I would also like to acknowledge he was the first, and I said this earlier on, the first black professional dancer. He was not in African Dancers, we were in our organization, but I'm really, Namron taught with us. Namron. And who, when he sent me a note, he said, Bob, I'm coming to the Mac. I said, but you live in London. But anyway, he now lives in Birmingham. And I know when you look at him, you think him didn't dance, but my engineer and technical man for many, many years. You still haven't bought me that beer yet. I know. Chester Morrison, you heard him mention. As I go along. Well, them wasn't born yet, but I will still introduce my daughter and my two grandsons. Enough other people, but we don't know if they could dance. So oh my God. Professor now, aren't you? Yeah. Jenny Douglas. Have I got it right? Yeah. Jenny. You stand. He was a better bowler than Wes Hall. But he never made the West Indies team. I'm going along. Carol, babes. Come on.
Macintosh. You never danced with me, although you worked with me in Black Voices for many years, Bernie Dixon. Professor Handsworth, like me, he never danced, but he took a lot of pictures. One of them names are calling, going to buy me a drink later, you know. I'm doing this for love. Kristen Seymour, who was our secretary. This lady totally by accident in Barbados. Accident, as they say, but Fiona dancing. Have I left out anybody? Oh, Coming to Desmond under promise now. Have I left out anybody in the audience? No. Who danced with or who contributed to my life? Hey, you're introducing your mommy? Hey, Christine's daughter.
That was me, by the way.
Dance with on the front page of the book dedicated to him as well. For many, many years. Thank you all. When I stand up here, I don't know what you see in here, you know. They're tall and they're beautiful. Nikki is my Jammer again. This is the world of black arts, where we work together. I had the pleasure of seeing and hearing Jammer play busking in town. In those days when we saw cassettes. I stand up, first of all, he's a fantastic player, and I thought he must be a Trini. My shock was him opening mouth, he tell me Jamaican. You remember those compact discs? Yes. And I went up to him and I said, come on, Jammer, man, you've got to move with the times. And I brought Bernie Dixon and Jammer together, and we produced his first album, a CD. I met Jammer in Bristol when I was managing Black Oasis, and we had about maybe 8 or 9 CDs out. And I was in a lovely hotel in Bristol. I could hear the pan, and I thought, black people everywhere, why? I walk around the corner, and I see Jammer, and Jammer said to me, Bob, look what you've done. I said, what? He said, look how many CDs. Jammer was employing people to sell his CDs. I'll give you another nice story. I'm on a cruise with my wife for 2 weeks in the Caribbean. And we get it in the lift one day, and somebody run up behind me. I'm talking now just a few months ago, December. Somebody pulled me short. I turn around and I see Jammer. I said, people like you are trying to forget. You call me on holiday. Can't get away.
So, part of the fraternity, Desmond, here, his daughter Tembi. Also his granddaughter.